It began not with applause, but with silence, the kind that ripples through gilded halls when something unthinkable has just occurred. As Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped into the ceremonial chamber wearing a full crown rarely seen outside coronations, every eye shifted, not toward her but toward Queen Camilla, because in that moment, something shifted, and within minutes, the unthinkable would happen. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What should have been a carefully controlled, impeccably staged royal ceremony had already been simmering beneath the surface with tension no one dared to acknowledge publicly, and yet insiders now suggest the warning signs had been there for days, hidden in hushed conversations, altered schedules, and the uneasy glances exchanged between senior aides who understood that something was unfolding beyond the official script. Reports suggest that the confirmation of Catherine's appearance in full crown regalia did not arrive with the usual ceremonial clarity, but instead emerged as a last-minute directive, one that caught even seasoned palace officials off guard, forcing rapid adjustments behind the scenes as protocols were quietly rewritten in real time. Those familiar with royal traditions know that such regalia is never worn lightly, never introduced without layered meaning, and certainly never without agreement from the highest levels of authority, which is why the sudden shift sent a ripple of unease through the inner circles of the monarchy. At the same time, Camilla was reportedly firm in her expectations, insisting on a ceremonial positioning that reflected her status and influence, a stance that insiders claim had been communicated clearly well in advance, making the late changes feel less like coincidence and more like deliberate disruption. Palace staff, usually composed and precise, were said to be scrambling in those final moments, navigating conflicting instructions while maintaining the illusion of seamless order, even as whispers of a last-minute directive began circulating in the corridors. Some accounts describe aides avoiding direct one contact, others mention abrupt changes in seating arrangements and ceremonial timing, all subtle signals that something significant had shifted behind closed doors. And as the key members of the royal family began taking their places, the atmosphere grew heavier, charged with an unspoken awareness that this was no ordinary event, that beneath the polished surface lay a tension that could not remain hidden for long. Eyes followed Catherine's every step as she entered, not just because of the crown she wore, but because of what it represented: a moment that seemed to challenge expectations, to rewrite roles, and to quietly question the balance of power within the monarchy itself. Even before a single word was spoken, the message had already been delivered, and those watching closely could sense that this was only the beginning of something far more consequential than a ceremonial appearance. Because as the silence lingered and the weight of that moment settled in, it became increasingly clear that what was unfolding would not end within the walls of that chamber, but would instead ignite a sequence of events no one present could fully control, because what no one realized in that moment was that Catherine's arrival wasn't just symbolic, it triggered a chain of decisions that would leave one royal figure abruptly removed from the very ceremony she helped shape. The crown Catherine wore that day was not merely ornamental, it was a declaration. And according to palace whispers, it wasn't supposed to happen. What made that moment so unsettling to those within the royal inner circle was not simply the presence of the crown itself, but the weight of what it represented. Because this was not just any ceremonial piece, it was one tied, in both memory and meaning, to Queen Elizabeth II, a symbol rarely brought forward unless the message behind it was deliberate and undeniable. Reports suggest that within the strict framework of royal tradition, such regalia is governed by layers of protocol so precise that even minor deviations require weeks, sometimes months, of quiet coordination, making Catherine's appearance feel less like an oversight and more like a calculated move that had bypassed the usual channels. Those familiar with palace operations have long maintained that nothing of this magnitude happens without awareness at the highest level, which is why insiders began questioning not just how it happened, but who allowed it to happen and, perhaps more importantly, who did not. At the center of this growing tension stood Queen Camilla, whose expectations for the ceremony had reportedly been aligned with a carefully structured display of hierarchy, one that would reinforce her position through symbolism as much as presence, a strategy that insiders claim had been meticulously planned in advance. Yet, in a single, unexpected moment, that structure appeared to unravel, as Catherine's crowned appearance disrupted the visual and symbolic balance that had been so deliberately arranged, leaving those observing closely with the unmistakable sense that something deeper was unfolding beneath the surface. Insiders claim that this was not simply about optics, but about authority, about who defines tradition in a monarchy that is constantly negotiating between its past and its future, and about who has the power to reinterpret those traditions in moments that matter most. The tension between established hierarchy and emerging influence has long existed within royal circles, often hidden behind formal smiles and carefully managed appearances. But on this occasion, it seemed to break through in a way that could not be easily contained or dismissed. Some accounts suggest that Catherine's role within the monarchy has been evolving more rapidly than publicly acknowledged, gaining quiet support from key figures who see her as central to the institution's future, while others hint at resistance from those who view such shifts as a threat to long-standing structures. What made this moment particularly significant was the growing realization that it was being interpreted not as an isolated incident, but as part of a broader narrative, a narrative in which the balance of power was subtly, yet unmistakably, beginning to shift. And as that realization took hold among those watching both inside and outside the palace, it became increasingly clear that this was no longer just about a crown or a ceremony, but about the direction the monarchy itself was moving toward, a direction that carried with it both promise and tension in equal measure. Because however carefully such moments are managed, they leave behind questions that cannot easily be answered. And in this case, those questions were already beginning to take shape behind closed doors, where discussions were growing more urgent, more deliberate, and far more consequential than anyone outside those walls could fully understand, because within the context of royal protocol, such a deviation could not go unanswered, and behind closed doors, decisions were already being made. By the time the ceremony reached its midpoint, the atmosphere had turned from ceremonial to confrontational, and something had clearly gone off script. What had begun as a carefully choreographed display of unity was now tightening into something far more fragile, as if the structure itself was being tested in real time by forces no one had openly acknowledged, and those watching closely could sense that the balance had shifted beyond quiet recovery. Reports suggest that Queen Camilla began to show signs of visible frustration, not through overt gestures, but through subtle breaks in composure that did not go unnoticed by those trained to read the smallest deviations from protocol. And in a setting where every movement is measured, even the slightest change can signal something far more serious unfolding beneath the surface. At the same time, senior aides were said to be receiving urgent instructions mid-ceremony, messages delivered with a level of urgency that insiders later described as highly unusual, particularly during an event of such significance, where precision and stability are expected above all else. Those familiar with palace operations have suggested that such interruptions are rare, and when they do occur, they often indicate that decisions are being made in real time, decisions that cannot wait until the ceremony concludes, which only deepened the sense that this moment was no longer under full control. As the tension quietly escalated, security personnel were reportedly repositioning themselves near ceremonial exits, not in a way that would draw immediate attention, but enough to signal to those aware of protocol that contingency measures were being prepared, a silent acknowledgement that the situation might require intervention. Whispers of a protocol conflict began to circulate more openly, and at the center of those whispers was Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose presence, particularly in full crown regalia, had already disrupted expectations and was now being linked directly to the unfolding uncertainty. Insiders claim that what was happening was not simply a clash of personalities, but a deeper conflict over roles and authority, one that had been building quietly over time and was now surfacing in a setting where it could no longer be concealed. Observers began noting unusual breaks in the ceremonial flow, pauses that lingered just a moment too long, transitions that lacked their usual seamless precision, and an overall sense that the event was no longer moving forward with the confidence it had started with. Some accounts suggest that Queen Camilla's role was being subtly reduced in real time, not through any formal announcement, but through the quiet reordering of attention, positioning, and emphasis, shifts that might appear minor to an outside audience but carried significant meaning within the rigid framework of royal ceremony. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. What was intended to reinforce established hierarchy was now exposing its vulnerabilities. And And the more the ceremony progressed, the clearer it became that something decisive was approaching. Because in a system built on tradition and control, moments like this do not simply fade away. They demand resolution, often in ways that are both immediate and irreversible. And as the tension reached its peak, those present could sense that whatever came next would not be subtle, would not be easily explained, and would certainly not be forgotten, because what followed next would shatter any illusion that this was merely a misunderstanding, because the next move was decisive, visible, and impossible to ignore. Then it happened, the moment that would dominate headlines and palace whispers alike. Queen Camilla was no longer part of the ceremony. What had been building beneath the surface finally broke through, not with chaos, but with a precision so controlled that it made the outcome feel even more deliberate, as though every step had been anticipated long before the first guest had arrived. Reports suggest that Camilla was quietly escorted out under official pretense, a movement so carefully managed that many in attendance did not immediately grasp its significance. Yet those attuned to the rhythm of royal protocol understood instantly that something extraordinary had just taken place. Conflicting accounts began to emerge almost immediately, with some describing the moment as strict protocol enforcement, a necessary correction to maintain ceremonial order, while others framed it as a strategic removal, a calculated decision designed to reset the balance of visibility and authority in real time. What made the situation even more striking was the contrast that unfolded alongside it, as Catherine, Princess of Wales, remained composed, continuing the ceremony without interruption, her steady presence reinforcing the sense that the event itself would not falter despite the sudden absence of a central figure. That composure did not go unnoticed, and according to insiders, it signaled something far more significant than simple professionalism. It suggested preparation, alignment, and a quiet confidence that the path forward had already been determined. Behind the scenes, senior royals, including Prince William, were reportedly aligned in their support of the decision, a detail that added weight to the interpretation that this was not an impulsive reaction, but part of a broader, coordinated response to a situation that had been developing over time. Palace insiders have described the moment as a calculated intervention, one that required both authority and timing, executed at precisely the point where it would have maximum impact while maintaining the outward stability of the ceremony itself. The idea that such a move could be carried out so seamlessly has led to growing speculation that it had been prepared in advance, with contingency plans quietly put in place should the situation demand decisive action, a possibility that raises deeper questions about what had been anticipated behind closed doors long before the public ever became aware of the tension. For those watching closely, the removal was not just a singular act, but a signal, a moment that revealed the underlying dynamics shaping the monarchy's present and future, and the more it was analyzed, the clearer it became that this was not simply about one ceremony or one individual, but about a shift in how authority was being exercised and redefined within the institution itself. Because when a system built on tradition makes a move this bold, it rarely does so without purpose, and the implications of that purpose extend far beyond the moment in which it occurs, leaving behind a trail of questions that demand answers even as the official narrative remains carefully controlled, because the removal itself was only the surface, because behind it lay a deeper power shift that had been building for far longer than anyone realized. What unfolded that day was not an isolated incident, it was the visible climax of a quiet but relentless transformation within the monarchy. For those who had been watching closely, the signs had been building for months, perhaps even years, hidden beneath formal appearances and carefully managed narratives, but now they were impossible to ignore, because what had once been subtle shifts in tone and presence had erupted into a moment that exposed the deeper forces reshaping the institution from within. At the center of this transformation stood Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose influence in ceremonial and symbolic roles had been growing steadily, not through sudden declarations but through a consistent pattern of visibility, composure, and alignment with the expectations of a modern monarchy, a trajectory that insiders suggest has been quietly supported by key figures who see her as essential to the institution's future stability. Reports indicate that this rise has not occurred in isolation, but alongside a strengthening alignment between Prince William and senior members of the royal structure, an alignment that has gradually consolidated influence around a shared vision of continuity and adaptation. one that seeks to balance tradition with the demands of a changing public landscape. Within this evolving dynamic, Queen Camilla's influence has reportedly encountered increasing resistance, not necessarily through open confrontation, but through a series of quiet recalibrations that have limited her role in key moments, adjustments that insiders describe as both deliberate and strategic, designed to shift focus without triggering overt conflict. Those familiar with the internal workings of the palace have begun pointing to what they describe as a new order forming behind closed doors, an emerging structure of influence that operates through coordination rather than declaration, where decisions are shaped collectively and executed with precision, often long before they become visible to the public. This evolving framework reflects a monarchy under pressure, not only from external expectations but also from internal realities, as it navigates the challenge of preserving its identity while adapting to a world that demands transparency, relevance, and stability in equal measure. The tension between these forces has created a landscape where tradition is no longer static, but actively reinterpreted, and where moments like the one witnessed during the ceremony become markers of a broader shift rather than isolated anomalies. Observers have noted that the narrative emerging from these developments is one of transformation in real time, a process that does not unfold through official announcements, but through actions that subtly redefine roles, responsibilities, and perceptions of authority. What makes this transformation particularly compelling is the contrast it reveals: the coexistence of continuity and change, of established hierarchy and emerging influence, all unfolding within a system that is built on the careful management of both. And as the implications of that moment continued to unfold in the minds of those who witnessed it, it became increasingly clear that the ceremony had not simply revealed a shift, but had accelerated it, pushing the monarchy further along a path that had already been set in motion, a path shaped by decisions made quietly, strategically, and often far from public view, because as the ceremony concluded, it became clear that what had just happened would not stay contained within palace walls. It was about to ripple far beyond them. By the time the final guest had departed, the ceremony itself was no longer the story. What happened behind the scenes had taken on a life of its own. The polished surface that had defined the public event dissolved almost instantly into a quieter, more intense reality, where conversations sharpened, decisions accelerated, and the true weight of what had just unfolded began to settle over those closest to the institution. Reports suggest that urgent internal meetings were convened within hours, drawing in senior aides and key figures who understood that this was not a moment that could be left to interpretation or allowed to drift without direction, because the implications were already beginning to stretch far beyond the ceremonial walls. At the same time, speculation outside those walls was intensifying rapidly, with media voices circling around the sudden absence of Queen Camilla, each interpretation adding a new layer of intrigue, each unanswered question deepening the sense that something significant had been deliberately concealed. The palace, however, maintained a calculated silence, offering no immediate clarification, no official narrative to anchor the growing wave of speculation, a choice that insiders suggest was not accidental but strategic, allowing the situation to settle while internal positions were assessed and reinforced. That silence, far from calming the situation, seemed to amplify it, creating a vacuum in which every detail, every gesture, and every rumor took on greater meaning, fueling a level of public curiosity that could not easily be contained. Experts began to weigh in, but even among those familiar with royal dynamics, there was no consensus, with some describing the events as a necessary assertion of order, a decisive step to preserve structure and authority in a moment of potential instability, while others framed it as a fracture point, a sign that underlying tensions had reached a level where they could no longer be managed quietly. This division in interpretation only mirrored the broader public reaction, which itself was split between shock, support, and confusion. As observers tried to reconcile the image of continuity presented by the ceremony with the disruption that had unfolded within it, for many, the event quickly transformed from a single moment into a symbol, a point of reference in an ongoing narrative about change, control, and the future of the monarchy, a narrative that now seemed impossible to ignore. What made this shift particularly striking was the speed with which it happened, how quickly the focus moved from what was seen to what was understood, from the visible to the hidden, as if the ceremony had simply opened a door that could no longer be closed. And as that realization spread, both within the palace and beyond it, the event began to be reframed not as an anomaly, but as a defining moment in modern royal history, one that revealed more about the institution than it ever intended to show. Because in a system built on continuity, moments of disruption are never just interruptions, they are signals, indicators of deeper forces at work, and the more those forces are examined, the clearer it becomes that they are shaping something far more significant than a single outcome. Because in the end, this wasn't just about one ceremony or one removal, it was about who truly holds power when tradition, symbolism, and legacy collide. In the days that followed, the palace said nothing, and somehow that silence said everything. What might have been expected to unfold as a controlled explanation or carefully worded statement instead became a void. And within that void, speculation expanded, sharpened, and took on a life of its own. Because when an institution built on communication through symbolism suddenly withdraws its voice, every detail left behind begins to speak louder than any official message ever could. No formal clarification was issued regarding the removal of Queen Camilla. And that absence of explanation did not calm the situation, it intensified it, creating a sense that whatever had happened was too complex, or perhaps too sensitive, to be reduced to a simple narrative. At the same time, something else began to emerge, quietly but unmistakably, as Catherine, Princess of Wales's role appeared to expand in subtle yet significant ways, not through dramatic announcements, but through a series of appearances and engagements that carried a different weight, a different emphasis, as if the institution itself was beginning to recalibrate around her presence. Observers noted these changes with increasing attention, pointing to slight shifts in positioning, in tone, in the structure of events, each one small enough to be explained on its own, yet together forming a pattern that suggested something far more deliberate was unfolding behind the scenes. Insiders have suggested that these developments were not reactions, but continuations of a process already set in motion, one that had reached a visible turning point during the ceremony and was now moving into its next phase with quiet determination. Alongside this, scrutiny on the internal hierarchy of the monarchy intensified, with analysts and commentators revisiting long-standing assumptions about roles, influence, and authority, now viewing them through the lens of what had just occurred, searching for meaning in the details that had previously gone unnoticed. Yet despite this growing attention, the public image of the monarchy remained carefully unified, with appearances structured to project stability, continuity, and cohesion, a reminder that even in moments of internal tension, the outward presentation must remain controlled, must remain consistent with the expectations placed upon it. This contrast between what was seen and what was suspected only deepened the sense of intrigue, because it suggested that the true story was unfolding beneath the surface, in conversations and decisions that were not meant to be witnessed directly. And as days turned into a steady rhythm of quiet observation and unanswered questions, one thing became increasingly clear. Silence, in this context, was not the absence of action, but a form of it. A deliberate choice that allowed space for shifts to take root without immediate resistance. The more that silence persisted, the more it invited interpretation, drawing attention to every movement, every absence, every subtle change that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Because in a system where meaning is often conveyed without words, silence can become the most powerful statement of all, shaping perception even as it withholds confirmation. And beneath that carefully maintained stillness, beneath the composed appearances and controlled narratives, one question continued to surface, refusing to be dismissed or forgotten, growing stronger with each passing day as observers tried to piece together what it all meant for the future of the monarchy itself. Because beneath that carefully maintained silence, one question refused to fade on, it would define everything that comes next. Because in the end, the image that remains is not one of removal but of arrival. Not the quiet exit that dominated whispers in the moment, but the unmistakable presence of Catherine, Princess of Wales, standing firmly within a role that seemed, until recently, just out of reach, and yet now appeared not only natural, but inevitable. What lingered was not the disruption, but the message carried within it, a message that spoke of transition, of evolution, of a monarchy stepping cautiously yet deliberately into a new chapter shaped as much by necessity as by intention. That crowned appearance, once questioned, now began to be interpreted as a symbol of something far larger than a single ceremony, a signal that the future was no longer waiting quietly on the horizon but was already unfolding in real time, reshaping expectations and redefining the boundaries of tradition itself. And within that shift lay a deeper tension, because the monarchy now stood at a crossroads, balancing the weight of its history against the pressure to adapt, to remain relevant, to project stability in a world that demands both continuity and change, a balance that is never easily achieved and rarely without consequence. Questions surrounding Queen Camilla's role did not disappear with the ceremony's end. Instead, they lingered, growing more complex with each passing day. As observers tried to understand where she fit within this evolving structure, whether her influence would be redefined, reduced, or recalibrated in ways not yet fully visible. At the same time, the internal dynamics of the royal family continued to shift beneath the surface, guided by conversations and decisions that remained out of public view, yet whose effects could be felt in the subtle changes taking place across engagements, appearances, and the overall tone of the institution. What had once seemed fixed now appeared fluid, and what had once been assumed now demanded reconsideration, as the perception of authority within the monarchy began to change, shaped not by declarations, but by actions that spoke louder precisely because they were not explained. The event itself, once seen as a singular moment, had become something more enduring, a reference point, a marker of transformation. A moment that would be revisited and reinterpreted as the monarchy continued to navigate its path forward. And perhaps most striking of all was the image that remained, not captured in a single frame, but held in collective memory. A moment where presence overcame absence, where continuity met change, and where the future revealed itself not through words, but through a quiet yet undeniable assertion of direction. Because in a system built on legacy, the moments that define it are rarely the ones announced, they are the ones that unfold, almost unexpectedly, leaving behind a sense of inevitability that only becomes clear in hindsight. And as that realization settled, it brought with it both clarity and uncertainty, a recognition that while the path ahead may not yet be fully visible, it has already begun to take shape, guided by forces that operate beyond the immediate and reach into the very foundation of what the monarchy represents. And as the doors of the palace close once more, one truth lingers in the air: this was never just a ceremony, it was a turning point. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.